It's Thursday, January 17th, 2019. Zach Parker, a close associate of the Gucci gang, is behind the wheel of his car, pulling out of a gym car park. But the 23-year-old doesn't get far. From the shadows, a gunman emerges. Bullets tear into the car. Parker is hit. The attack is swift, precise. The shooter wasn't there to scare him, he was there to finish him. Emergency services race to the scene, but for Parker, it's too late. He is pronounced dead where he sits. He had allegedly secured drugs on credit from the Gucci gang, a Finglas-based group operating under the Kinahan cartel. But before he could sell them, authorities seized his stash. In Irish Gangland, it didn't matter that the drugs were confiscated. The debt still had to be paid. The Gucci gang's leadership, including Mr. Flashy, wanted it clear. Debts were not forgiven. But what they didn't anticipate was the chain reaction this murder would set off.
10 people have died in gang-related violence so far this year. 5 of those deaths are related to a feud in Coolock.
The 22-year-old victim of the latest Gangland murder in the capital had survived previous attempts on his life.
Owen Boylan was perceived to have made disparaging comments on social media about one of the other feud murder victims, Shaun Little. That was a factor in his murder.
The generation of younger men are becoming involved in organised crime and putting their own lives and the lives of others in danger.
Low-level dealing now is enough to have you, with your life taken.
In the months that followed, his murder would spark a wave of retaliation killings, dragging more and more people into the cycle of bloodshed. This is the story of the Coolock Feud. Coolock and Darndale, 2 neighbouring districts in North Dublin, had long been hotspots for drug-related crime. Unlike previous years, when crime bosses operated discreetly, this new generation of gangsters was younger, more reckless, and eager to prove themselves. For decades, North Dublin had been plagued by drug feuds, but the arrival of crack houses in Coolock and Darndale took things to another level. Authorities were struggling to control the epidemic, as addiction-fueled petty crime, burglaries, muggings, and violent intimidation became rampant. Yet, these were only surface-level symptoms of a much larger issue. The gang networks that controlled the trade were waging a war for dominance. At the center of this violence was a Finglas-based gang operating under the Kinahan cartel's umbrella, often referred to in the media as the Gucci gang. This group was led by a young but feared figure known as Mr. Flashy. His gang specialized in cocaine distribution, using teenage runners and social media to grow their influence. Unlike older, more calculated crime syndicates, this new generation of criminals thrived on visibility, posting photos of luxury cars, designer clothes, and stacks of cash online. Despite their power, the group was far from stable. It was fractured, with internal betrayals and unpaid debts fueling disputes. One of the key figures in the Coolock feud was Shaun Little, a young, ambitious drug dealer from Coolock who had managed to carve out a space for himself within Dublin's growing cocaine trade. He was well connected, particularly to junior members of the Kinahan cartel, and used these ties to source significant quantities of drugs. While he wasn't at the top of the food chain, his growing influence and business operations made him a rising figure in North Dublin's gangland. One of Little's closest associates was Zach Parker, a small-time dealer who handled street-level distribution. Parker was more than just an associate. He and Little were lifelong friends, and their success saw them taking luxury trips to Dubai, spending drug money on high-end cars and designer clothes. By late 2018, tensions between rival gangs were reaching a breaking point. Shaun Little's growing drug network had begun to encroach on territories controlled by more established criminals, including Mr. Big, a crime boss who oversaw much of Coolock's drug trade. This expansion created friction, and Little's increasing influence was viewed as a threat by multiple factions, including the Finglas-based gang, led by Mr. Flashy. When Zach Parker found himself in dangerous waters, it deepened fractures within Coolock's already fragile gangland. His mounting debt intensified tensions between rival factions that had long been teetering on the edge of war. Some sources suggest that Parker's debt may have been as high as €200,000, though others believe it was significantly less. Regardless of the amount, it was money that Parker didn't have. Despite Parker's criminal past, those who knew him outside of the drug world saw him differently. Friends described him as a decent, likable man, someone who had been trying to build a better life. One of the people most affected by Parker's death was Shaun Little. He had lost his closest friend and business partner, and instead of backing down, he vowed revenge. He made it clear that he wanted payback for Parker's murder, putting himself directly in the crosshairs of those responsible. At Parker's funeral in January 2019, Little posted pictures of them together, calling Parker his brother and making veiled threats about revenge. Despite his deep ties to Parker, Mr. Flashy was notably absent. Instead of attending, he posted imagery online around the time of the service, keeping a calculated distance from the gathering. His absence spoke volumes, fueling speculation that he had either sanctioned Parker's murder or, at the very least, wasn't interested in avenging it. This deepened a growing divide within the Gucci gang, between those demanding retribution and those more concerned with maintaining business and avoiding police scrutiny. The funeral laid bare the fractures that had been forming within the gang. One faction, led by Shaun Little and his associates, wanted blood for Parker's death, feeling betrayed by the lack of response and left questioning the involvement of their own leadership. Then, there was the other side of the Gucci gang, still loyal to Mr. Flashy. Tensions simmered beneath the surface, but it wouldn't take long for them to erupt. Shaun Little had spent months looking over his shoulder, making it well known that he intended to go after the people responsible for Parker's death. That kind of talk was dangerous in Dublin's underworld. Retaliation was inevitable. On May 21st, 2019, emergency services were called to a burning car near Walshestown. When they arrived, they found a black Opel Insignia engulfed in flames. 10 feet away from the wreckage, lying motionless on the gravel, was Shaun Little. He had been shot multiple times, once in the head and once in the chest. The execution was precise, calculated, and final. His body was left in the open, abandoned on the side of a desolate road, a sight meant to send a message to his associates. His growing aggression following Zach Parker's killing was said to have unsettled many within the gang. While multiple theories exist about why he was executed, the most widely believed is that he had become a liability. Little had publicly vowed revenge for Parker's murder, making no effort to hide his intentions. But while he was pushing for retaliation, others in the Gucci gang, particularly those still aligned with Mr. Flashy, were more cautious. Another possible factor is that Little's influence within the gang had become a growing concern. He was known to have ties to the Kinahan network, reportedly associating with figures like Lee Byrne, son of Cartel member Liam Byrne. His connections may have allowed him to bypass Mr. Flashy's authority, leading some to see him as a potential threat to the gang's existing hierarchy. Ultimately, the exact reasons behind Little's murder remain unclear. Some will swear they know the truth, probably even commenting rumors they've heard on this video like they're facts. But the real truth is buried within the inner circle of the Gucci gang, the only ones who truly know why Shaun Little was taken out. Within hours of his body being discovered in Balbriggan, his associates began arriving at the scene. Among them was Hamid Sanambar, a 41-year-old Iranian who had been closely linked to Little. He stood with grieving family members, including Little's father, as they tried to process what had happened. But beneath the grief, suspicions were simmering. Sanambar, who had been a visible figure within the gang's ranks, quickly found himself under suspicion. Some of Little's closest associates began to question why he had been so quick to arrive at the scene and whether he had prior knowledge of the killing. The rumors only grew as details of the murder became clearer. Little's associates were convinced that Sanambar had played a role in the setup. But before they could act, another murder shook the city. Less than 24 hours after Little was executed, his close friend Jordan Davis was gunned down in broad daylight. The cycle of violence had reached a terrifying pace, and this time, the brutality unfolded in full view of the public. On May 22, 2019, at around 4 p.m., Davis was walking along Marigold Road in Darndale, pushing his 4-month-old son in a buggy. Just 10 minutes before his death, he had posted a tribute to Little on Facebook, sharing a photo of the two of them together with the caption, "Rest in paradise, you were a gent." As Davis strolled with his infant son, he spotted the gunman approaching. Witnesses later described how he immediately realized what was about to happen. He turned and ran, trying to escape. The assassin pursued Davis. Davis was shot multiple times, collapsing to the ground while his baby remained unharmed in the buggy. His killer cycled away from the scene, leaving the 22-year-old bleeding out just yards from Our Lady Immaculate National School, where parents picking up their children were left in shock. The brazen nature of the execution stunned the community. This wasn't just gang members settling scores in back alleys. This was a war spilling onto the streets, where children played and families lived. The timing of Davis's death was suspicious to authorities. He had been murdered minutes after posting about Shaun Little, making it almost impossible to dismiss as a coincidence. An anonymous account left a mocking comment under Davis's tribute. The message read, "You're resting with him, ha 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 ha." The comment was quickly deleted. His murder was seen as a direct continuation of the feud that had begun with Parker's execution. One theory was that Davis had been killed over an unpaid drug debt. He had been heavily involved in the local drug trade, operating within a network that included both Parker and Little. It was suspected that he owed money to the same Kinahan-linked Gucci gang that had ordered Parker's execution. Some sources claimed his debt was as high as €70,000, an amount he had no realistic way of repaying. A known enforcer had been demanding repayment from him in the weeks leading up to his death. Whatever the motive, the pace of the killings had accelerated beyond control. 3 murders had taken place in the space of a week. The Gucci gang was splitting at the seams, paranoia was at an all-time high, and trust was disintegrating fast. And then, just a few days later, the violence reached a new level. 7 days after Shaun Little's execution, friends and family gathered at the Little household for a wake. Among those in attendance was Hamid Sanambar, a surprising presence given the rumors that had begun circulating in the days after Little's murder. Sanambar had been spending time at the Little household in the aftermath of Shaun's death, seemingly aligning himself with the grieving family. His actions leading up to the killing had raised suspicions, and some believed he had double-crossed Little. Despite these suspicions, Sanambar walked into the house, paying his respects as if nothing was wrong. Whether he was there to genuinely show solidarity or to gauge the atmosphere is unknown. As he stepped out of the house and onto the driveway, 3 masked gunmen were already waiting. The killers, armed and prepared, opened fire without hesitation. Sanambar was shot multiple times in the head and chest, collapsing in the garden of the Little home. He died almost instantly. The attackers then fled the scene in a Toyota Avensis, which was later found burned out. Originally from Iran, Hamid Sanambar had arrived in Ireland seeking asylum and was later granted permission to remain. Over time, he became involved in the criminal underworld, forming connections with multiple gangs, including factions linked to the Kinahan Cartel. Despite being older than many of the younger gang members he associated with, he had embedded himself in Dublin's gang scene and was often seen alongside figures connected to the Gucci gang. Sanambar had a reputation as a violent enforcer, someone who handled dirty work for higher-ranking criminals. He had reportedly spent time in Cork and Longford before settling in Dublin, where he became more involved in gangland activities. He was rumoured to have been a hitman for hire, though much of his reputation was built on fear and speculation rather than confirmed actions. In the aftermath of Shaun Little's execution, suspicions began to surround him. Authorities launched a major investigation into the killing, quickly identifying a primary suspect. The man, whose name has not been disclosed, was in his 30s and originally from Dublin. He fled Ireland shortly after the murder. For years, he managed to stay under the radar, moving between various locations in Spain. However, in July 2024, Spanish police arrested him over an unrelated minor crime in Costa del Sol. It was only after his arrest that officers realized he was the subject of a European arrest warrant issued by Irish authorities for his alleged role in Sanambar's murder. Further investigation revealed that the fugitive had spent his time in Spain, associating with notorious criminals. Authorities were able to link the suspect to Sanambar's murder through forensic analysis of a burner phone recovered during the investigation. The phone contained crucial data, placing him in the vicinity of the hit, strengthening the case against him. Despite the arrest, the investigation into Sanambar's execution remained ongoing. Authorities believed that multiple individuals had played a role in setting up and carrying out the hit. While Sanambar was wiped out, Stephen Little, Shaun Little's father, still wanted blood. He was convinced there were more people responsible for his son's death. In the months after his son's murder, Stephen Little's life unraveled. He lost his marriage, and any sense of normalcy was gone. He became obsessed with tracking down his son's killers, and by September 2019, he had a target in his sights. Authorities suspected that Stephen had been planning to assassinate Cowlan Smith, a Kinahan cartel hitman with a violent track record. Smith had already established himself as a ruthless enforcer before the Coolock Feud even began. In 2017, he had been hired by the Kinahan cartel to murder Hutch associate James Margot Gately, a man who had survived multiple attempts on his life. Gately miraculously survived, and Smith went on the run. For 2 years, Smith continued operating in gangland circles, moving between various factions within the Kinahan network. By the time the Coolock Feud erupted, his name kept surfacing in police investigations into contract killings, intimidation, and drug enforcement. Stephen Little believed that Smith had been one of the key players involved in Shaun's murder, either as an executioner or someone who sanctioned the hit. But Smith wasn't an easy target. Unlike low-level gang members, he was well protected, constantly on the move, and had the backing of the Kinahan cartel. On September 14th, 2019, Little and his associate, Edward MacDonald, were pulled over at Lyne Park, Harmonstown, by authorities. They had been under surveillance for weeks, with police believing a retaliatory killing was imminent. When officers searched the vehicle, they uncovered a loaded G9 semi-automatic pistol, 2 balaclavas, 2 baseball bats, gloves, multiple mobile phones, a can of petrol, and a long-handled lighter. It was the perfect kit for a hit. Little didn't bother lying about what he had planned. When questioned by authorities, he admitted everything. He said, "Had you given me another hour, I would have killed the bastard that killed him." Then he added, "I lost my marriage and my son." Little and MacDonald were charged with possession of a firearm in suspicious circumstances. Initially, MacDonald pleaded not guilty, but halfway through the trial, he changed his plea to guilty. Little was sentenced to 6 years in prison, while MacDonald received 9 years, with MacDonald's long history of violent offences factoring into the decision. While Stephen Little's revenge attempt failed, Cowlan Smith didn't escape justice for long. In 2021, he was convicted of attempted murder for the botched assassination of James Gately in 2017. The attack had been personally sanctioned by the Kinahan cartel. Smith was sentenced to 20 years in prison. By late 2019, the Coolock Feud was a war with no clear sides, just shifting alliances and relentless paranoia. The body count was rising, and there was no sign of it slowing down. Owen Boylan was next. Unlike some of the other victims, Boylan had been given every opportunity to escape his fate. Authorities had formally warned him that he was a marked man, even advising him to leave Dublin for his own safety. But he ignored the warnings, convinced that he could carry on with his life. Owen Boylan was just 22 years old. By day, he worked as a postman, but he had another life as a street-level drug dealer, moving product through Coolock's local networks. He wasn't a major player, but he was deeply connected to those who were. He had been close friends with Zach Parker, Shaun's Little, and Jordan Davis, 3 men who had been gunned down in the same year. After Shaun Little's murder, tensions erupted online. Taunts, threats, and insults were thrown between rival groups. Authorities believe Boylan posted something about Little's death that was seen as disrespectful by Little's associates. On November 24, 2019, at around 5:15 p.m, Boylan was standing in the front garden of his home on Clonsor Avenue when his killers arrived. A gunman approached while a getaway driver waited nearby. 9 shots rang out, hitting Boylan in the arm, chest, and upper body. His death brought the total number of gang-related murders in Ireland that year to 10. Half of them were tied directly to the Coolock Feud, making it the deadliest gang war of 2019. The Coolock Feud may not dominate headlines as it once did, but the violence it sparked continues to shape Dublin's underworld.